Hello, people. Welcome back to Edbert Leadership. I just came back from voting in the UK local council elections here in my area in Wickford for my candidate, for councillor for Wickford North. His name is Billy. I want Billy to win. He's young, he's active, full of ideas. He came knocking on my door several weeks ago, and I was happy to help him share his flyers on my street and a few other streets as well. Voting is one of the clearest expressions of civic leadership. And I think, in a sense, we have trivialized it for some time, for too long. Because for citizens, when citizens vote in a democracy, something profound, happens. People are deciding who they will authorize to exercise power on their behalf. And that, takes us into one of the most important distinctions we must always understand in leadership, the difference between authority and leadership. Winning in an election does not automatically make someone a leader. It gives them authority. Leadership still has to be practiced. And that distinction matters deeply, whether in the United Kingdom or in Nigeria, anywhere in Africa or in the world. And I want us to think carefully about what it means for citizens to authorize people to govern. I also want us to reflect on the relationship between the people and those entrusted with public office. And I particularly want to speak to my dear Nigerian audience, because one of the reasons democracy struggles in many societies is not merely because of bad politicians, but because the process and structure of authorizing individuals to lead is itself weak, oftentimes manipulated, distrusted, or broken. And when authorization is compromised, democracy itself becomes unstable. And one of the simplest and most powerful definitions of authority is this: A, entrust B with power in exchange for service. That definition changes everything, because it immediately reminds us that authority is not ownership. Authority is stewardship. Authority is borrowed. It is entrusted. In a democracy, citizens are authorizers. The elected officials are the authorized. And the purpose of that authority is service to the people. Not self-preservation, not domination, not entitlement, but service. And this is why democracy matters. Because democracy is fundamentally a mechanism through which citizens choose who should temporarily hold authority on their behalf. Notice the humility embedded in real democracy. No one owns power permanently. No office belongs to anyone forever. The people lend authority, and the people can withdraw it. That is a healthy democracy. This afternoon, I just finished voting. I'm reminded that civic participation is not just a political exercise. It is leadership behavior, because leadership is not merely what happens in parliament or in council or in the legislative chambers. Leadership is also expressed by citizens who take responsibility for the future of the society. Apathy is not leadership. Silence is not leadership. Withdrawal is not leadership. Participation matters, my friends. And now this is where many societies become confused. We mistake authority for leadership. But authority and leadership are not the same. Authority is a position. Leadership is an activity. Authority can be granted through election. Leadership must be demonstrated through behavior and actions. You can hold office as an elected official and still fail to lead. And you can have no office whatsoever and still exercise enormous leadership. Authority simply gives you a platform. What you do with that platform determines whether leadership is occurring. And this is why election matters, because elections are not simply about personalities. They are moments where citizens assess how authority has been used. Has this authority served the people well? Has it mobilized progress? Has it protected institutions? Has it strengthened trust? Has it addressed difficult realities? Or has authority merely been used for self-interest, political survival, propaganda, and control? Voting, my friends, is feedback. Voting is accountability. Voting is society speaking back to power. Let's push this further a bit. In many democracies, citizens behave as though leadership is something politicians do alone. But democracy does not work that way. The health of a democracy is tied not only to the authority figures or to the leaders, but to the maturity of the authorizers. In other words, what kind of citizens are we becoming? Are we thoughtful? Are we informed? Are we engaged? Do we ask difficult questions? Do we evaluate competence and character? Or are we simply emotionally manipulated every election cycle? Because poor authorization produces weak governance. If citizens reward incompetence, corruption, tribalism, propaganda, or empty populism, then society itself participates in reproducing failure. And this is where civic leadership becomes important. Democracy requires citizens who understand that voting is not funfair, it is responsibility. You are temporarily transferring power. You are saying, I entrust you with authority to act on behalf of the community. That is serious. And this is why I personally find local elections so important and fascinating, because local government is often where democracy becomes tangible. It's close to the people. You talk about roads, schools, housing, waste management, community well-being, local services. And these things affect everyday life directly. And yet many people ignore local elections. What is particularly interesting in this current Wickford North, councillorship election is that one of the candidates, actually the incumbent candidate, is an independent candidate. Someone elected previously without allegiance to a political party. Now, irrespective of political preference, I think there's an important leadership lesson here. It reminds us that democracy is ultimately supposed to belong to citizens, not merely political structures. Political parties are important. They organize ideas, policies, and governance structures. But democracy must never become captive to party machinery alone. Because when parties become more important than people, authority can drift away from service and toward political preservation. Independent candidates often remind society of something powerful, that authority ultimately derives from the people, not from party headquarters, not from elite political networks, but from citizens choosing who they trust to represent them. Again, this is not about endorsing any candidate. It is about understanding the deeper principle of democratic authorization. Authority flows upward from the people. That is the moral foundation of democracy. One of the reasons many Nigerians feel frustrated with democracy is because there is often a disconnect between the people and the authorization process itself. And we must be honest about this. You cannot claim to practice genuine democracy while the system for authorizing leadership lacks credibility. If elections are manipulated, if citizens lose confidence in the process, if votes appear disconnected from outcomes, if institutions are weak, if political capture dominates the system, then people begin to disengage emotionally from democracy itself. And that is dangerous, because democracy depends on trust. The people must believe that authorization is legitimate. Without legitimate authorization, authority itself becomes fragile. And when authority becomes fragile, leaders often compensate through excessive control, coercion, propaganda, or patronage. But real democracy is built on consent, not fear, not manipulation, consent. And this is why electoral integrity matters. This is why institutional credibility matters. And this is why citizen participation matters. And this is why leadership education also matters and must be done. Because democracy cannot mature beyond the civic maturity of its citizens. One of the greatest mistakes people make is assuming democracy begins and ends on election day. No, voting is only one part of democratic leadership. Real democracy requires ongoing engagement. Citizens must continue asking questions, holding leaders accountable, participating in community life, building institutions, protecting truth, defending justice, and sometimes even challenging the very leaders they voted for. Because authorization does not mean blind loyalty. It means entrusted responsibility. In healthy democracies, citizens do not worship politicians. They evaluate them. And elected officials must never confuse electoral victory with permanent moral legitimacy. Authority must continually justify itself through service. That is the deal. That is the social contract. A entrusts B with power in exchange for service. The moment service disappears, the moral foundation of authority begins to weaken. So today, whether you are here in the UK, in Nigeria, anywhere in Africa, or anywhere in the world, remember this: voting is not merely politics. It is leadership participation. It is citizens exercising responsibility for the future of their society. And perhaps one of the greatest signs of democratic maturity is when both leaders and citizens understand this simple truth: authority is borrowed, leadership is practiced. You may hold office and still fail to lead, and you may have no office at all and yet exercise tremendous leadership, true responsibility, courage, participation, and civic engagement. Democracy works best when authorizers remain awake, when citizens remain thoughtful, when authority remains accountable, and when leadership remains focused on service. Because in the end, the true purpose of authority is not to be served, it is to serve. Thank you for listening to Edbert Leadership. And wherever you are listening from today, don't just complain about society. Participate in shaping it. See you some other time. Thank you. Bye-bye.